You know, as usual, it seems like I'm running a day behind, or 10 days behind, or a decade behind. And I log in the other night, and here I see the Brigade channel just flooded with commentary and entries and vlogs and logs and twatters and twitters and smoke signals from all and sundry going on about the great game master debate. Hmm. And I thought, no, I'm not going to get into this. I'm not going to get into this. Not going to get into this. And then I see GM Grumpy and Runeslinger and a number of others, and I go, okay, Batman's going to get his 2 cents worth. And hey, that's the way it works, man. Y'all made this thing, not me. All right, I jumped on the bandwagon a while back and trying to hold on. It gets right now. I think it's careening down a rocky road on the side of a cliff. Two of the horses missing. What does that mean? I don't know. I agree with everybody here. And I tend to agree with most people anyway. And then I disagree a little bit here and there. You know, of course, the GM has a persona, a game face, an extra hat, if you will. If you ran your regular life like you do when you're the game master, well, for starters, your life would be a much rosier place than it tends to be, wouldn't it? Because we could just rewrite what we don't like, or we can modify that particular law or rule to make it fit our needs for the moment. And that's the nature of the GM as a mediator, moderator, and a judge. There was a time, if you go back deep enough into the history of the hobby, that's what they originally wanted to call it, was the judge or the mediator, right? How it became the master, I don't know, and you'd have to go to deeper heads. Uh, Mr. Bach and I had a nice dialogue the other day about an unrelated topic of how the elves were created in the Middle Earth canon. And if you go and you Google and you look up YouTube, you can find a slew of different things, but they don't always match. They don't always agree on how something's approached. And that's typical because everybody has a different view on things. I've said this in the past, based on gaming experience as an example. Our thought processes file things away up here in the back of our file cabinet or our GUI RAM, however you want to look at it nowadays, and a different formula or pattern from everybody else. And in the same aspect, somebody can bring up something, and while we will recognize that subject or item as something that they too recognize, we may have interpreted it immediately in a different way. And I will use this as an example, the term crusader. Okay, I'm familiar with the crusader from the Middle Ages, from the historical fact of a person who went on a religious I don't want to call it pilgrimage or conquest because it was a bit of both. But anyway, we know that concept. We also know that there's a subclass, or there was a subclass in one of the 2.0 or 3.0 versions of D&D or AD&D that had a variant of the paladin called a crusader. Okay, and the neo-religious connections that all applies. But also having been a huge fan of Battletech and MechWarrior for a long, long time, often somebody brings up that term Crusader. The first thing out of my mind is the mech that is called a Crusader. Now, I refer that to many other players or gamers, game masters, and so forth. Most of them will make that same connection, but not necessarily in the order that I made it. I made it first, and then I connected with the Middle Ages version that they may be just bringing up. Now, once I explained to them what I was thinking, the light goes on in their dusty back room and goes, we found that file here too, Bob. Here you go. Here you go, boss. This is what he's talking about. So we all recognize that, yeah, there's a persona, there's a hat, there's a personality change that goes on when you put yourself into that position of having to run, control, and moderate and mediate for the player. Then there's also that secondary role. I mean, most player characters, i.e., the reason we call them player characters, is the player plays their character. And whether it's their voice, their personality that hangs through, or they concoct a poorly scripted or an elaborately, excellently scripted persona for their character, and they're consistent in using that character, that is not as difficult as it is for most GMs to come up with multiple personalities, multiple personas, because what do? We are acting in the roles of the NPC. So then there's that school of thought where some of you say, well, the game master is not a player. Well, that's not necessarily true. Not from my perspective, if you look at that from the aspect that we do play the game just like they do. The only difference is they've all agreed to abide by our interpretation of the rules, just as GM Grumpy brings up, and several others, that this is a mere guidelines. You just go look at the AD&D core book, the Dungeon Master's Guide, somewhere in there, or in the Player's Handbook, in the very first 2 pages, it says that. And it's mainly said that in every version thereof. That these are not set in stone, but they're merely meant as guidelines to be adapted or adjusted or rewritten or thrown out or whatever based on what fits your need and your player character's needs, your player's needs to make your world viable or palatable to them and to yourself. Right? On the other side of the coin, we also have to have that ability to interact as everybody else, be it the bad guy, the monster, the merchant, the local town guard, what have you. It's the GM's role, and a key piece of the GM's role, to interact as that other person. Now, you can get away with, and I have tried this on a couple occasions, especially if I've got a large enough group of players and not everybody is present in a given situation. That happens when you get too many players, as far as I'm concerned. Some of them break off to go do another thing, or the group splits into 2. Well, at that point, I've also tossed in and said, okay, you and you, since you're out of the picture at the moment, because you're over on the other side of this castle complex, are going to act in the role of these 2 NPCs or these 4 NPCs that they are just encountered, and all I'm going to do is mediate the encounter and deal with how that works. So, you hand them the NPC sheets and let them go. So, you can do that, but at the same time, there you go. Is that part of the persona or not? Now, from a prospect of a would-be author writing several very thick manuscripts, one of these days I'll hold that big, huge tote I got up there down and wave a few of them at you. Not that they'll impress most of you fellows. Some of you guys are very articulated and very well versed, and your verbiage is awesome, and I feel like a clumsy oaf compared to y'all. And at the same time, I know there's a huge amount of work that goes into making a good story palatable to other people. You want it to be interesting. You want it to draw them in. You want them to immerse themselves. That is, as Samwise 7, old Tim says, we want them to immerse themselves in the experience that we're spinning up, that we're creating. We, as a GM, also immerse ourselves in it, and we have to. We become vested or invested. And I think there is a huge difference between a GM who's not vested or immersed into the campaign or the game system that he or she is currently running. Think about that. How many times as a player have you played with somebody who really didn't want to be the game master at the time or the dungeon master at the time? They didn't want to play that role. They wanted to be a player. Or they're being tapped to play something they've either lost heart with, they've lost interest in, or they truly don't understand it well, and they're embarrassed to admit that. And so the play suffers. It's just inevitable that everybody's going to trip up, or at some point the thing's just going to lurch to a stop, and everybody's collectively or independently are going to go, I'm done playing this particular one. I'm sorry. I don't feel it. I'm not into it. I'm not immersed as I would, as Tim would have it. There you go, right? That isn't that the nutshell thing here we're talking about. Why are we having this great debate? Well, okay, Jim, Grumpy. Hey, you love your opinion. You got every chance and the freedom to do so, and I applaud it and I encourage it. And I actually love debating you on occasion, although I don't think you like debating me that much. In that aspect. Why are we having this debate? Well, I don't have the answer to that. I think I don't even know how it got started. I do know that there is value in this. As Anthony mentioned here a while back in an unrelated thing, when he was wrapping up the 31-day question challenge, uh, having the opportunities to see a different disparate opinions and visions from other angles than our own is a rich experience that gives you the opportunity to broaden your mindset or your understanding of the craft that goes into the hobby that we all participate in. And as a would-be writer, as I said, finding the voice is a difficult process. And sometimes you just stumble across it by dumb luck, and sometimes you don't. As a GM, finding your voice and your style and your stance takes time. It takes time and effort. Some people have to kit bash it together. They have to pull out a bag of tools and build themselves a box, a frame that they put themselves into to focus. Other people wear it like a jacket. We slide it on as a comfortable old shirt, and that needs to be washed a bit more often than it gets to, and it's because that's what we are. And then there are others who will say, the differences vary from game system to game system. Absolutely, positively true, but not necessarily absolutely true, because some people get set in their ways. Some people become, this is the only persona I can pull off, or this is the only voice I can successfully do, and we carry it over from game system to game system. Uh, I will acknowledge that when I'm running a Star Wars campaign, I am much more the silent or the quiet narrator role, and much less the antagonistic manipulator and behind the scenes as I am in more my hack and slash stuff. Depends on the sci-fi system. Depends on how much I spend into it. It's easy to say you have different hats. It's much harder to actually pull them off, and especially if you're with the same group of players for any length of time. They know, they know your style. They get used to it. They expect it. So when you divert from that style, it can throw a stumbling block at them. Make them sit back and go, "Whoa, wait a minute, what's up with that? You're not your normal self, there, Fred." Uh, and some people have that knack, that ability to, progressively alter their persona on a daily basis. And some of us, as we get older, not so much. Isn't that the crux between a story based games, a story based campaign and a mechanical based campaign? The mechanical based campaign pulls up the book, here's my rules, here's my guidelines, this is what we're doing, A to B, B to C, D to D, 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 D. And where the storyline takes this and sets it off to the side, merely just not quite out of sight, but as a reminder that we do have a set of checks and balances to make sure that our gaming experience doesn't become too overly skewed. Uh, I'll equate that to having the cheats to a video game. You can win in a video game if you have the cheats. You can go fly right through it and have a perfect game. But where's the challenge of learning that step by step process and investing yourself in playing this game for the sake of either playing it or for the sake of conquering it, right? So what's the end goal of the whole group or the GM? So, do we have a voice? Of course, we have a voice. Are we a persona? You betcha we're a persona. Even the nuts and bolts mechanic based mediator judge is going to have his own persona because he's a person. He or she is a person. They have a style, and some of it's humorous, some of it's not humorous. I mean, Okay, if you've seen The Big Bang Theory, you've seen this. You may have seen the episode where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you got old boys strict to the rules, no personality approach to running things, and he's astounded when everybody else is much more enamored in Raj's version because Raj is the ultimate storyteller. He spins up the stories. He has a voices for all of his bad guys. He throws humor in there, and he's successful at it. I mean, there's a lot of people, myself included, who think we're funny, and in our own mind, we are, ridiculously funny. And to our, to whoever's across the table from us, did you get that? Is that supposed to be? Right. Persona's a persona. Is it or isn't it? The debate continues.